Picture this: a massive ocean liner racing against time. Its engines push beyond their limits, as behind a wall of water the height of a 10-story building swallows everything in its path. This isn't the plot of a disaster movie. This is a true story of the SS Hilo Maru, a forgotten vessel whose desperate flight from nature's most terrifying force became one of the most extraordinary maritime escapes in history. What you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about tsunamis, courage, and the thin line between survival and catastrophe. On March 27, 1964, the second most powerful earthquake ever recorded struck the remote wilderness of Alaska. But this story doesn't begin in Alaska. It begins 3,000 miles away in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where Captain Hiroshi Nakamura was enjoying what he thought would be a routine voyage aboard his passenger liner. The SS Hilo Maru was returning from Honolulu to Yokohama, carrying 847 souls through waters so calm they resembled polished glass. Nobody aboard that ship knew they were about to face something that would test every limit of human ingenuity and determination. The Hilo Maru wasn't just any ordinary vessel. Built in 1951, she represented the pinnacle of post-war Japanese shipbuilding, stretching 600 feet from bow to stern and capable of cutting through ocean swells at 22 knots. Her passengers were a mix of Japanese businessmen returning from Hawaii, American tourists heading to Japan, and families relocating across the Pacific. Many were sleeping peacefully in their cabins when the first radio transmission crackled through the ship's communication center at 2:47 in the morning. Radio operator Kenji Tanaka was monitoring routine weather reports when an urgent bulletin from the Honolulu Observatory pierced through the static. The message was brief but chilling. Massive earthquake, magnitude 9.2, tsunami waves generated. All Pacific vessels advised to seek immediate shelter. Tanaka's hands trembled as he wrote down the coordinates of the earthquake's epicenter. When he plotted their position against a seismic event, his blood ran cold. They were directly in the path of whatever was racing toward them across the ocean. Captain Nakamura had commanded ships for over 20 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. He understood the science behind tsunamis better than most mariners. In the deep ocean, these waves travel at jet aircraft speeds, often exceeding 500 miles per hour, but they're nearly invisible, passing beneath ships like whispers in the night. The real terror begins when they encounter shallow water, where the ocean floor forces all that energy upward, transforming invisible ripples into towering walls of destruction. But the Hilo Maru faced a unique predicament. They were approximately 400 miles northeast of Hawaii, positioned over an underwater mountain range where the ocean depth varied dramatically. Some areas plunged at depths of 12,000 feet, while others rose to mere hundreds of feet below the surface. This underwater topography would act like a giant amplifier, taking the tsunami's energy and focusing it into concentrated beams of devastation. The captain made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone unfamiliar with tsunami physics. Instead of heading for the nearest port, which would take them directly into the path of maximum wave amplification, he ordered a course change toward the deepest part of the Pacific Basin. His plan was audacious: outrun the tsunami to deep water where its power would be distributed over vast depths, making it passable. First Officer Masato Sato questioned the order. The logical response would be to race toward Honolulu, where they could beach the ship or find protected harbor. But Nakamura knew something that would save every life aboard his vessel. Tsunamis behave differently depending on water depth, and the ship's only chance lay in reaching the deep Pacific before the waves caught them over shallow underwater mountains. The engine room received orders to push the ship beyond her design specifications. Chief Engineer Toshiro Yamada had never been asked to maintain maximum power for an extended period, but he understood the stakes. The Hilo Maru's engine began consuming fuel at 3 times their normal rate, generating vibrations that could be felt throughout the entire vessel. Passengers began waking up, confused by the unusual motion and the sound of straining machinery. What happened next reveals the extraordinary power of human communication under pressure. Rather than hiding the truth, Captain Nakamura made an announcement that became legendary among maritime professionals. He explained the situation with calm precision, describing the tsunami threat and their escape plan. He asked every passenger to remain in their cabins not out of fear, but to help the ship maintain optimal weight distribution for maximum speed. The response was remarkable. Instead of panic, the passengers organized themselves. Families gathered in their rooms, sharing stories and playing quiet games to pass the time. The ship's small crew of engineers and maintenance workers volunteered for additional duties, monitoring systems that were being pushed to their absolute limits. Even the children seemed to understand that something important was happening, maintaining unusual silence throughout the ship. Meanwhile, in the radio room, Operator Tanaka was receiving increasingly urgent updates from coastal monitoring stations. The tsunami had reached the Aleutian Islands with devastating effect, wiping entire fishing villages from the map. Wave heights were being reported at over 100 feet in some coastal areas. More disturbing was the calculation of the wave's speed across the open ocean. The initial estimates had been conservative. The tsunami was traveling even faster than predicted. By 4:30 a.m., the Hilo Maru was racing through waters that had become strangely luminescent. Phosphorescent plankton, disturbed by the approaching seismic waves, created an eerie blue glow around the ship's hull. Lookouts reported unusual cloud formations on the horizon, generated by the massive air displacement that preceded the tsunami. Nature itself was announcing the approach of something unprecedented. The ship's navigator, Lieutenant Koji Watanabe, was performing calculations that would determine whether they lived or died. Using slide rules and mathematical tables, he computed their speed, the tsunami's projected velocity, and the depth contours of the ocean floor beneath them. His calculations revealed a terrifying reality. They had less than 40 minutes to reach water deep enough to survive what was coming. At 5:15 a.m., the first electromagnetic effects reached the ship. Compasses began spinning wildly. Radio communications became erratic, and the ship's lights flickered from power fluctuations caused by the massive magnetic disturbances preceding the tsunami. Some passengers reported feeling dizzy or nauseous, symptoms that maritime doctors now recognize as human sensitivity to infrasonic waves generated by approaching seismic sea waves. Captain Nakamura faced a moment of doubt that nearly changed everything. His fuel reserves were depleting rapidly, and they still hadn't reached the deep Pacific basin. If they failed to outrun the tsunami, they would be caught with insufficient fuel to maneuver when the waves arrived. The temptation to turn toward the nearest land was overwhelming, but his understanding of tsunami physics held firm. The breakthrough came at 5:42 a.m. when the ship's depth finder registered a sudden drop from 2,000 feet to over 8,000 feet. They had reached the edge of the Pacific basin, but Nakamura knew they needed to go deeper still. The engines continued their relentless pounding as the Hilo Maru pushed into waters that few commercial vessels had ever traversed at such speed. At exactly 6:03 a.m., lookout Hiroki Matsuda spotted something that will forever be etched in maritime history. On the horizon behind them, the ocean appeared to be rising. It wasn't a wave in any conventional sense, but rather a broad elevation of the entire sea surface, stretching from north to south as far as the eye could see. The tsunami had arrived. What followed challenged everything scientists thought they knew about tsunami behavior in deep water. Rather than the invisible passage that textbooks described, the approaching wave created visible disturbances even in the deep Pacific basin. The water around the Hilo Maru began moving in strange patterns, with powerful currents flowing in directions that defied normal ocean behavior. The ship's chronometer showed 6:18 a.m. when the first tsunami wave passed beneath them. Passengers reported a sensation of being lifted by an invisible hand, followed by a gentle descent that lasted nearly 3 minutes. The wave had retained enough energy even at depth to create noticeable vertical motion, but the ship remained stable and secure. But the captain knew their ordeal was far from over. Tsunamis travel in wave trains, with multiple waves following the first. Some of these subsequent waves can be larger than the initial one, and their spacing can vary from minutes to hours. The Hilo Maru would need to remain in deep water until the entire wave sequence had passed. Over the next 4 hours, 17 separate tsunami waves passed beneath the ship. Each one created unique sensations and visual effects. Some caused bioluminescent organisms to glow brightly around the hull, while others generated unusual weather patterns directly above the ship. Passengers described feeling as though they were riding a slow-motion elevator that carried them up and down to the ocean's surface. The psychological impact on everyone aboard was profound. They knew that just a few hundred miles away, these same waves were striking coastlines with unimaginable force. Radio reports described devastation in Alaska, California, Oregon, and Hawaii. Entire harbors have been emptied of water, only to be refilled by walls of debris-laden sea water that destroyed everything in their path. Chief Engineer Yamada reported that the engines had performed beyond all specifications, but they were now consuming their emergency fuel reserves. The decision of when to turn back toward civilization became critical. Too early, and they might encounter residual waves amplified by underwater topography. Too late, and they would find themselves stranded in the deep Pacific without sufficient fuel to reach any port. Captain Nakamura made his final crucial decision at 10:30 a.m. The tsunami monitoring station in Honolulu had confirmed that the major wave sequence had passed, and coastal conditions were beginning to stabilize. The Hilo Maru turned northwest toward Japan, carrying her 847 passengers and crew away for what had become the most successful tsunami escape in maritime history. The return voyage revealed the full scope of what they had narrowly avoided. Radio communications brought reports of destruction that boggled comprehension. In Crescent City, California, 11 people had died when tsunami waves demolished the harbor district. In Kodiak, Alaska, the fishing fleet had been carried inland and scattered across the landscape like toys. The waves had even caused damage as far away as Chile and Japan. But perhaps the most sobering revelation came from other ships that had been caught by the tsunami in shallow water. The cargo vessel Pacific Pioneer had been overwhelmed near the Aleutian Islands, with all hands lost. The fishing boat Tsunami Maru, ironically named, had been found capsized off the California coast. The Hilo Maru's decision to race toward deep water rather than seek shelter had likely saved nearly 1,000 lives. The scientific community took immediate interest in the Hilo Maru's experience. Never before had a large passenger vessel successfully escaped a major tsunami through strategic navigation. Captain Nakamura's detailed logs provided unprecedented data about tsunami behavior in deep water, information that would revolutionize maritime safety procedures for decades to come. When the Hilo Maru finally reached Yokohama 3 days later, she was met by crowds of reporters, scientists, and maritime officials. The successful escape had become international news, but Captain Nakamura deflected praise toward his crew and passengers. He emphasized that their survival had depended not on heroic actions, but on understanding the science behind natural disasters and making rational decisions under extreme pressure. The aftermath of the Great Alaska Tsunami, as it became known, led to the establishment of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. The lessons learned from the Hilo Maru's escape were incorporated into international maritime safety protocols. Ships officers worldwide now train in tsunami recognition and evasion techniques that trace their origins directly to those terrifying hours in March 1964. Today, the SS Hilo Maru's nameplate hangs in the Maritime Safety Museum in Yokohama, but her story remains largely unknown to the general public. The ship herself was scrapped in 1978, her steel recycled into new vessels that carry advanced tsunami detection equipment as standard safety features. Yet the courage and scientific thinking that saved 847 lives continue to influence maritime safety procedures around the world. Captain Nakamura passed away in 1995, having spent his remaining years teaching navigation and maritime safety. His logbook from that March morning is preserved in the Japanese Maritime Archives, a testament to the power of knowledge, courage, and quick thinking in the face of nature's most awesome forces. The Great Alaska Tsunami killed 131 people across the Pacific, but it could have been far worse. The story of the Hilo Maru proves that sometimes the most extraordinary heroism comes not from dramatic gestures, but from understanding science, trusting knowledge over instinct, and having the courage to make impossible decisions when every second counts. In a world where we often feel powerless against natural disasters, their story reminds us that human ingenuity and determination can triumph even against the most overwhelming odds.